Here are things Mega Mike is trying to cut for Americans. 1. Health and Human Services programs. Some proposals would reduce funding for agencies under the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. Examples discussed in budget plans. Around a 6% cut to HHS funding overall. Proposed cuts to programs at the CDC and other health agencies. Large proposed reductions to the National Institutes of Health, NIH, and public health programs in earlier proposals. Programs affected could include disease prevention programs, mental health services, addiction treatment programs. It looks to me like these mega Congress are trying to put us in danger when it comes to our health. These things they want to cut are very important for our children and elderly. These are things Trump told Mega Mike to cut so that money gets spent for more wars and other thing we would not like. House Republicans are proposing cuts in several areas of federal spending as part of budget and appropriations bills. These cuts mostly target domestic programs, while many proposals increase or protect funding for defense and border security. 3. Medicaid and health coverage. Some Republican budget frameworks have proposed major long-term cuts to Medicaid. A House budget resolution targeted about $880 billion in reductions from programs overseen by the Energy and Commerce Committee, which includes Medicaid and some health programs. Changes discussed include work requirements for some Medicaid recipients, stricter eligibility checks, higher fees for some participants, food assistance and safety net programs. Some proposals aim to reduce spending on low-income assistance programs. Programs mentioned in various proposals include SNAP, food stamps, housing assistance, some public health programs. These reductions are often proposed to offset tax cuts or reduce federal deficits. So they take away from the people to fix something they've broken. They are up to the same thing they did last time that all the past deficits added together become the national debt, which is currently around about $38 to $39 trillion total debt. The U.S. government is currently borrowing roughly $2 trillion every year to cover spending. How the debt gets repaid. The U.S. usually pays off debt in two main ways. New revenue from taxes. Future generations of Americans pay income taxes, payroll taxes, and other federal taxes. The government can raise taxes, keep them stable, or borrow more to cover interest. Borrowing and rolling over debt. The U.S. often issues new bonds to pay off old bonds. This works in the short term but adds interest costs, which grows the total debt. Which presidents added the most to the national debt? Keycap 2. What actually causes most of the deficit? Tax cuts or spending? 1. Presidents who added the most to the national debt. Here are rough increases in total U.S. debt during recent presidencies. Numbers are approximate because debt changes daily. President debt increased during presidency Ronald Reagan, 1981 to 1989, about $1.9 trillion. George H. W. Bush, 1989 to 1993, about $1.5 trillion. Bill Clinton, 1993 to 2001, about $1.4 trillion. George W. Bush, 2001 to 2009, about $6.1 trillion. Barack Obama, 2009 to 2017, about $8.3 trillion. Donald Trump, 2017 to 2021, about $7.8 trillion. Joe Biden, 2021 to 2025, about $4 to $5 trillion, approximate, if the government spends about $6.5 to $7 trillion a year. Collects in taxes, about $4.5 to $5 trillion. The difference, about $1.8 to $1.9 trillion, is the deficit, and the government has to borrow that money. One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Different estimates exist, but most independent analyses land in roughly the same range. Estimated deficit increase. According to the Congressional Budget Office and other budget groups, about $2.3 to $2.4 trillion added to the deficit over 10 years. Around $3 trillion added to the national debt when interest costs are included. Some analysts say the total could reach around $3.4 trillion, depending on assumptions. If temporary tax cuts in the bill were made permanent, the cost could rise to roughly $5 trillion over a decade. Why it increases the deficit? The main reason is tax cuts reducing federal revenue. Major parts include extending tax cuts from the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, New tax breaks, such as deductions and business incentives. Some new spending on border and defense. There are also spending cuts, for example to Medicaid and some assistance programs, meant to offset part of the cost, but they do not fully cancel out the lost tax revenue. Simple way to think about it. Roughly speaking, tax cuts reduce revenue by about $3 to $4 trillion. Spending cuts reduce costs by about $1 to $1.5 trillion. So the net result is trillions added to the deficit. Here's the clearest picture we have right now of how much the war with Iran is costing the U.S. government and how that can affect the federal deficit, and it's already adding up fast. U.S. officials told lawmakers the first 6 days of the war cost more than $11.3 billion, nearly $1.9 billion per day in just those early days. Some independent estimates put the cost around $1 billion per day overall on ongoing operations. These numbers mostly include things like weapon use, operations, and moving ships and aircraft into the region, but they're not the full picture. Longer-term projections. Experts warn that as the conflict continues, the total cost could grow far beyond the initial figures. Budget analysts and models suggest that U.S. war spending could easily add tens of billions of dollars to federal deficits if the war drags on. Some independent fiscal analyses, cited by economists like Kent Smetters, have warned that costs of direct operations alone could reach $40 billion to $95 billion if the conflict lasts longer, not including follow-on equipment replacement, veteran care, and other costs.